Mhm.
Hey, Wholeness, welcome. This is Josh of Inner Skilled, and today I have Lincoln Stoller with me. Lincoln, what's going on today?
Well, I like to be a busy person, and sometimes you get overwhelmed. I like to be in a pond with lots of waves, and sometimes I feel like I'm in danger of being capsized. So that's what I kind of feeling.
Well, I don't know. I think you hide it pretty well. I mean, we were just chatting a little bit, and of course, I don't know you from Adam yet. It's just you don't seem like a guy that shows a lot of overwhelm. I
Well,
didn't,
you
you
have
know.
to you have to keep the boat upright. That's not to say there aren't waves. I mean,
Sure.
I'm very bothered right now about the response I'm getting to a physics article I submitted for publication.
Yeah.
And I keep telling myself, and this is true of many things, if you do anything important, not only can you expect blowback, but you have to accept it's your obligation to deal with it. Because otherwise, you're just like hit and run. And it's really not morally, upright. It's not virtuous. You're not here to just like make a point and flee. If that's your attitude, you really don't have any right to stand up and speak to people. You
Well,
have to
that's
answer them.
Well, that's a fascinating framing and a really juicy hook there. So we'll get into. I'd like to ask you a little bit about that, but let me just stick to my little. I have hardly any format here, but one of them is, who is Lincoln Stoller and what kind of work does he do?
I don't know who I am. I only know my history. I've always been interested in what's going on, and I've always felt a desire to attach, which I think came from parents who were unattached. I think you develop certain things from your early childhood, and to oversimplify, your father, or then, Western masculine cultures, teaches you to cope with the organizing and presenting yourself, and your mother teaches you to have love and self confidence. And my father was largely absent because he was a sort of workaholic, traveled a lot. And my mother was very absent for, if not any other reason than she was an older mother. Had me when she was like 42, already had two kids, already grown up. And I was kind of like an incidental house pet. And I felt ignored. And since my siblings were older, they weren't around to beat on like most siblings are. And I ended up looking outward, sort of spending time in the woods and looking toward older people because that was what my family consisted of, and wanting to get answers and wanting to connect. And I mean, you can think of that as not a particularly good combination in Western society where there's a lot of disconnection and a lot of materialism. So I was always interested in science because I had the misimpression that scientists were more seriously interested in getting answers. I'm still being disabused of that, but so it goes. And I got involved in mountaineering as a teenager because that was a reality hit. It was real consequences, real responsibility, real decision making, and really on my own. So you can see sort of fits in. I think it fits in. And I continued, almost everything I do is like in 10-year periods. So I was mountaineering for 10 years, and then I was in physics programs for 10 years. And then I got into computer software, was in that for 20 years. And then finally I got into, well, I was always interested in traveling. So I traveled a lot. And I got into psychedelics, culture, and spirituality, all of which were ongoing interests of mine. But I then became a hypnotherapist to more formalize that. And I used some of my technology to become a neuropsychologist, meaning I studied the brain and the relation of personality to brain states and, training of your brain and so forth. And then I became a psychotherapist, which is, all these things, they have categories. And the more you study the categories, the more contrived they become. They sort of define their own territory for their own purposes. So psychotherapy exists for psychotherapists, and so physics exists for physicists. And if you thought this was some sort of, large scale human transnational endeavor, you're wrong. It's very relative to whoever's doing it in this generation and time. So in any of these things, if you're open-minded, you quickly hit the boundary of open-mindedness. It's written in the textbooks, it's structured in the institutions, and amazingly, when you transgress or go beyond the boundary of what's normal, you find a lot of irrational behavior. Scientists start to behave like, upset people when you rock the boat, and in every field. So I happen to like being creative. Maybe that's also part of my childhood upbringing around, a family of, they were all artists. But I still get my greatest rewards from creating things. And you got to understand that to be creative means there's a lot of monkeying around, a lot of trying, and you have to be okay with failing, or you have to redefine it as second tries or something. So you develop, and I have developed, this ability to keep on task and not get too upset and be stubborn. It's stubborn versus commitment. What's kind of the difference there? I'm committed to my tasks and I stubbornly pursue them. So, being a psychotherapist is a welcome relief. You get to deal with other people's problems, and you get to criticize and judge and get paid for it. What a pleasure. If you take it seriously, of course, and if you're effective and successful, and I mostly am, though sometimes you get people who were not really there for your help, but just wanted to be furthered in whatever they were doing. They didn't want your advice, they just wanted your support. So I'm not that supportive. I'm judgmental, and then I'm supportive of what I judge to be correct or positive, and not supportive of what I feel is not. So this is what I do these days. I write a lot about, you use the word parapolitics, which I haven't decided where to put yet, but it sounds like it's sort of what I do. I talk about the psychological currents behind people and social actions, and I pretty much discard the the front story or the explanation, the rationalization, which of course you have to do with psychotherapy too, because everybody's got rationalizations.
Well, it still can be a little window into, what's really going on, the kind of cover story that's used, so to speak, right? Or we also, what's not being said is just as important, if not more important than what we're told. We're going to media stories, right? And, it always reminds me of this like movie where if you watch the whole movie and at the end, the news media comes on and the news media portrays what actually happened that we followed throughout the media in a completely different way, or sometimes in a completely different way than what's actually happened, right? So yeah, there's so much going on around that, and with so much stuff classified, no wonder people come up with theories that want to know what's really going on in truth, because it's how many trillions of dollars of things that are classified and we're not allowed to know about. And of course, rightfully so. Some of them should be, but I don't want to digress too much into that unless you're interested in that. We can definitely go down that route. But I think is from what you laid out there, from your work and your interest, why don't we jump into your physics paper if you'd like to share with that, and maybe that will give like a current glimpse into some of your other interest endeavors in the past and maybe coming up too. And how does just generally, how does physics fit into what you're doing now too? Or is it just kind of a side pursuit?
I don't know, it's hard to say. There are different kinds of physics. I think most of what's done is practical, because that's what is funded, connected, and in a sense, easier to understand. It's consequential, experimental, verifiable. It works on the basis of protocol and formulas. There are problems and there are solutions or solutions that are wanted. And there's pretty much a reward structure. What you get if you're a worker in the field, what you might get if you succeed in inventing something or solving something. And then there's academia, which is sort of there to fund you in between, or fund you even if you're not going to do anything but teach. And I've had a few good mentors. I have 3, 2 were in physics, 1 in biology, and hundreds of bad ones. I would like to write a book, I say, but I probably never will, about how to learn from bad teachers, since they outnumber the good ones 99 to 1. And of course, they teach very important lessons. They're not role models in the kind that you want to follow, but they exemplify what you're going to do or find and whether or not you're going to prevail, because those are the road is built of negative teachers. So if you can't travel that road, you're probably not going to prevail in that whatever field it is, or else you're never going to rock the boat or think anything new, so forth.
Well, it's a really good point. It's navigating that. I'm so glad I'm out of those waters, so to speak. And as far as I know, in physics, it has to be mathematically based, right, or it needs to be measured by some kind of device. So there can be data, and there needs to be some kind of experiment done. But if it can't fall in these boxes, it's completely off the table, right, or considered
There's a third area. Okay. Yeah. The most important area is not mathematical rigor or experimental verification.
Money.
It's money.
Funding.
Well, I would say ego gratification.
Oh, there we go. Okay.
It's so if you've got, in my case, if you've got a legacy of knowledge, which now people have taught, they've believed in, their reputation is built on, their social, mystique is perpetrated, and now you come along like I have and say, that's wrong. It's not, you're not going to get a mathematical rebuttal or a physical one. You're going to get an ego rebuttal. And that's what I'm dealing with. And so at the same time, you have to say, well, yeah, that's reality. It's too bad that the mathematical rigor and the experimental evidence would not prevail, but that's human nature. And unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, I don't know, these are human beings. I mean, this is the whole AI thing. Now that we can get away from human beings, are we better? In some sense, we will be. In other senses, we won't be.
And this is important because, I mean, that's understandable, right? Dealing with individual egos. I think where the rub could really be is when, okay, like whole areas of science and physics are built on something that's not true, right? Or let's say if that's not the case, what happens if that does become the case, that, generations of certain fields of science have been built on something that's just not true or right, and something comes along, and a lot of people cling on to that, right? It's really hard to let go of that entire thing because careers and institutions have been built on certain things, and so that's devastating for a lot of different people and a lot of different things. So I mean, how would you deal with that? Being a psychotherapist, maybe you have some insights into this kind of phenomena.
Well, so 2 examples. One is like fusion energy. They've been trying to get energy out of fusion for decades, at least 50 years, maybe more. They've been pouring money and building departments, institutions, and as far as I can tell, gotten nearly nowhere. The problem being that fusion is hot and it melts everything you put it in, so that's the end of the experiment. You can't contain it. Gravity contains it if it floats in outer space, but we don't. So no one's figured out how to contain them. And, they've got reputations, and I don't know if they've been awarded Nobel Prizes, but that's what they do kind of in order to enshrine your reputation in perpetuity. And I don't think it's going to go anywhere. I think at some point. There are plenty of other sources of energy that are going to be able to be tapped, renewable sources, but they don't continue the legacy of fusion. And most importantly, they don't centralize money. So now there is a unspoken conspiracy that structures should perpetuate themselves and should grow. Institutions should grow in power and reach. And I think the future of energy is contrary to that, where it will go smaller, even like, wind power or wave power. But I think there's plenty of other things that will come online or could come online that would disrupt the system, would disrupt the political structure. So there's one thing.
It's funny you mentioned that, though, with the parapolitics is, from what I understand, a lot of these really groundbreaking innovators who have patented, let's just say, closer to 0-point energy or whatever, there's just lots and lots of documentation of how they've been shut down, bought off, silenced, marginalized, on and on and on and on and on. So with that type of stuff, people have to be really careful, I find, so, okay, continue.
So that's one. And the other is, well, I'm in the area of quantum mechanics, and quantum mechanics is interesting, and it's hard to make good metaphors. You get a lot of sort of pop psychology and pop science that tells you things like everything in the universe is connected, therefore we should all be Buddhists, or some sort of horse shit that takes one thing.
Interconnected, not connected, but anyway, nothing exists in a vacuum, right?
Whatever you might mean, whatever you're selling. And so, I've come forward and said that's not true, and this is why. And I'm fighting a convention that has come to believe much nonsense. It has become enshrined as the mystery of quantum theory, and it's bullshit. So, when I say this, the response I get is, but what about all these complicated, indecipherable explanations that lead us nowhere? Now, I'm supposed to explain them. And at the one hand, I say, it's not fair to ask me to untangle your nonsense. I'm just replacing it with something that's better. But no, we are invested. We are stuck in this, up this creek, and we want you to, I don't know what they want me to do, but
play ball. I don't know. Yeah.
Play ball or get out of town, or and so that. I feel it's kind of a social obligation. I wouldn't go as far as to say to be crucified, but to deal with the failure of other people to achieve their own stated goals. So I will endeavor to answer some of these people because, I do give them, some of them that actually take me seriously, credit of having taken me seriously. A lot of people just say, yeah, you're full of shit. We're not going to listen to you. Go away. Literally, I got one journal that said our readers are not interested in what you're talking about, which was like, here we're talking about a dialogue that's been going on for 100 years. So, those people are, okay, you wash your hands of people who don't want to talk.
It's really interesting. I never thought that the journals that they have to sell journals and readership too. But like science, what happened to the scientific method and truth above all else, instead of turning it into a religion and have to have a belief system involved in scientism, So yeah, I am disillusioned with the whole field, a lot of it too,
Yeah, like religions have a different sales model than science. Science sells to institutions and sells through return on investment, and religions sell to communities and offer support, solace, and absolution. I think absolution is a big one. Different. I mean, there's overlap because science gets rather religious when it goes overboard.
Oh, yeah.
And so, that's what, frustrates me. And I have to say, I can't get too frustrated because otherwise they'll just, I'll burn up, in re-entry or sort of.
It really is a good point, and that brings us into the psychotherapy part. I imagine here is that, if I may ask, is that kind of how you got interested, and on a personal level, on how it can benefit your own challenges and struggles, or like what, I guess, what got you interested in that? And then if you're open for a couple hardballs around psychedelics and hypnosis, I'd love to throw a couple your way.
I don't think those are easy bowls. The harder bowls were understanding in the experience of my scientific education that these people were not interested in science as much as they were interested in belonging to their institution and fortifying their institution. I have a
Politics.
rule of three questions. In any science, there's going to be explanations of things. And you can question those explanations. And if you question them once, you're considered an interested student. If you question them twice, to sort of question the answer you got the first time, you're considered a slightly aggressive student. And if you question them a third time, you're out, you know, because at each level, you'll get a more vague and answer and a more threatening defensive posture. And at the third level, you're just a revolutionary or considered a revolutionary. So it took me a long time to realize that the best questions, of course, are the ones that never stop. And you keep asking, and you never stop questioning or doubting the answers you get. There's almost, like I said, I have three good teachers. Those three good teachers were people who would never stop asking questions. And everybody else drew the line basically at what they knew. And if you ask them questions that showed that they didn't know what they claimed to know, then they'd ask you to leave. Literally, I've been asked to leave because of the questions I've asked.
I'm in the same boat with this. I'm a big, say, just curious being in general, and this is what drew me to Buddhism, quote unquote, with this ism, is that there's really no doctrine. The only doctrine is open inquiry. And this is, you're encouraged to ask questions, and you have to realize the knowledge directly for yourself, the wisdom and the truth, so to speak, for yourself. So, but like when it comes to this, for me, it's also my intentionality for doing it. Now, if the intentionality for asking the questions is actually to honestly be interested and to arrive at the truth for my own welfare and happiness and that of others, especially in the long term, yes, then go forward with it. And it's the appropriate time to do so. It's going to create harmony, and it's going to be, helpful, like I said. And of course, it's going to be honest, and it's going to be kind and done in a way. So, however, I will say that some of the times when I'm not aware of this, it has been ego driven, that I think that I'm smarter than someone else. So then I will question them, right, to show how they're wrong and I'm right. And then I feel satisfaction for being right about it. I also, one of my pet peeves is deception. So one of the ways to get at deception, of course, is to question something, kind of just show a logic flaw or whatever, or just basically call it out, which is okay. But it's a really tricky one, because I have to be careful with how I go about that and how I receive that, and my own behavior when going about that stuff, because usually deception is for to get back at someone or to protect. That's a lot of times deception comes
or to
into
gain
that play.
advantage.
Yeah, exactly. Well, yeah, that would be, that would, well, both of those are advantageous, I guess. But yeah, where it's coming from, the questioning, right? I think in Zen they say big doubt. You have a big doubt but not this. Okay, I'm gonna question and doubt because I want to be right. That's, at the end of the day, that's okay. But I mean, that doesn't further really me or the science or anyone else, in a sense. I'd rather be well than right. But now when you come to science, I don't know if that necessarily applies. But
Well,
yeah.
it's interesting. I mean, there's all these pissing matches. You have to
Absolutely.
avoid getting into pissing matches.
Sure.
Because nobody really wins. You don't get good answers. You just get points if you're keeping score. And you have to be willing to lose the game, or I should say not play the game, which means losing according to the structure that you've been playing. So, I keep thinking of like biblical analogies. Why would you try to argue the morality of something with people who aren't moral? Would you be trying to influence them? Would you be trying to gather support. You know that you're making enemies. But on the other hand, you're injecting, or you feel you are, and I think it's fairly defensible that you are injecting something positive if that's your intention. But so the question asked something like, how did I get psychology from physics? And it took me a long time to realize that there was a limit to what you could do in science, partly because of the people and partly because of the legacy of, the tools you had. And I don't feel particularly able or skilled compared to some of the people I've worked with or learned about. But times were different, and I have to be gentle with myself and recognize, as I intimated, that if you're doing something creative, you're almost by definition out on a limb. And I try to be confident in what I feel is the best answer. And a lot of people will shoot you down and say, well, it's not as good as our answer, or our answer is better because there's more of us who believe it, or, whatever. So there's a certain amount of tolerance that's necessary to be creative. And you don't want to end up like Van Gogh, or a lot of people go crazy. It's easy to go crazy if you spend your whole life and never be appreciated. So psychotherapy is kind of like a relief. You have the privilege to speak. You have the respect of somebody who's thoughtful, or you're considered somebody who's thoughtful and respected because of it, and you're paid for it. And I like the equation better of being paid for an hour of my time to say what I think and attend to what's being presented as a better formula than being said you're on salary basically to uphold the institution, which I didn't like that equation because I don't think I've liked any institution I've been in because of its inherent, structure.
Well, just the term institutionalization, right? Yeah, I'm kind of the same ilk here. And usually there's some kind of window dressing or pandering about creativity, right? But when it comes down to it, a lot of institutions and organizations, they don't want creativity. That will upset what's already in place and potentially the power structure. While they pretend that they like creativity, that's not what they want. In fact, you better not do that, really, or you're in trouble. If you push creativity within certain organizations and institutions, that's trouble. Yeah.
One of my mentors was Charlie Towns, who invented the laser, and he had all these wonderful stories about how people resisted him, how they threatened to fire him, how they told him he was wasting everyone's time, and that his ideas were stupid. And you could see, because I worked with him and he had a history, you could see that he had the personality to persevere. He was a close family friend of Martin Luther King's, and that those people had to persevere, the whole Southern racial equality movement. And he had some of that sensibility, that firm, polite, stubborn Southern sensibility. And, so he would respond rather than react. And he would respond to people who did not know as much as he did, even though that they were claimed to be the experts in the field. And he persevered. And as he made the transition from being the outsider to being the insider, once he got the laser to work, then a whole institution, arose around him. And really, it continued to develop. Today, it's a real institution. Lasers are everywhere. They're involved in everything, if not literally, then at least the theory of them. And, he said that in today's world, he never would have gotten the support because he worked at Bell Labs in New Jersey, where for that time, people were allowed to just work on because it was before the breakup of the Bell monopoly. They had lots of money. They poured it in. They didn't demand conformity or even performance. And so he was able to do the work And he said, I don't think we could have done it today. So the question is, how many more things, as you mentioned, are being squashed because they're not producing for the institutions that are funding
Totally.
them?
That then you have to have people go underground sometimes, and sometimes that carries its own risks and challenges and shenanigans. I'm thinking about couple of mine, their kids are homeschooled, and how a lot of the creativity, how creative and, iconoclastic some kids that come out of that are, and still
Yes.
do quite okay as well. So
My
thinking of
first kid
that,
was homeschooled, right?
homeschooled. So going back though to what you said about, why would you preach morality to someone that's not moral? And what came up for me too, though, when reflecting on that is, it's a good point, but then that will identify kind of a fool that I'd be interacting with. And then I don't want to associate with fools. I might just say my piece and then move on and not really associate with them anymore. Because to me, someone that's not interested in, just standard ethics, and to me that means non-harming. We can go into that if you want, but like anyone that's not interested in that, it's okay. They're either ignorant or foolish, and then and I don't really have much time to associate with that. And it's not thou shalt, or in service to being a goody two shoes or whatever. It's just kind of like this common social agreement that's for my own welfare and happiness,
Yes.
and those around me. So it's just basic common sense to me. However, I will say though that I didn't always see it that way. I didn't always know the benefit of it. That I took kind of a crash and burn, and then a really deep introspection and meditation practice to see that what's so obvious now. And it's a practice, and not to beat myself up over it. It's an ongoing practice. These basic ethics.
Well, let me
Sure.
take that somewhere,
Hmm.
because
Sure.
on the softer side, you could ask, why be innovative with people who are not innovative? Why offer innovations to people who are not innovative? Hell with them. What are they going to do for you? They're just going to be sort of stick in the muds. But the answer is, those not innovative people can come up with some good criticisms. They can say, but it doesn't work here, or it's in conflict with our religious dogmatic belief in some sort of scientific thing. And some of that stuff can make you think. And I have found that in my physics work, that some of those insufferable, small-minded, egotistical, and prejudiced criticisms that I get make me think, maybe that deserves to be answered, or maybe I should think about that. Because as a creative, it's easy to just continue mixing colors, and make the sky green and make the sheep blue, and go on without structure or discipline. It's easy to do that. And there is some benefit to slowing down and saying, how is it viewed from other people? How will it be viewed? How will it be seen? So then, to take that sort of back to the ethics thing, the benefit of preaching morality to immoral people is to say, well, a lot of people aren't clearly one or the other. They're kind of on the fence, or they're kind of unable, or they can't see. This is the benefit of psychology. They're not aware, they're not perceptive or reflective, and that maybe dealing with the amoral person strengthens your rhetorical ability, so that you have a better dialogue and make a little better political impression without stalling and hemming and hawing and wandering around.
I tend to agree, as long as it doesn't become like a fixation or a mission, right? But yeah, it's absolutely. And then we're kind of framing this in an externalization part. But if someone says something about me, well, then that will either tell me something about myself, or if it's not accurate, then will tell me something about them. And and then I have another data point on, then what do I choose to do? Do I want to continue interacting more or less with this person, or turning it inward? Oh wow, they've got a point there. Okay, maybe I need to take a look at that and do something about that. Yeah.
So to take the right angle turn you suggested, I'm actually not that interested in psychedelics anymore. They're too easy. I'm more interested in dreams, which are inscrutable. And I've found they both take a different approach. So to deal with psychedelics, you have to be prepared, you have to be patient, you have to titrate them to the right degree so that you're not completely lost. It helps to have something on your mind, even though it may not be what comes up. At least you have some feet on the ground somewhere, at least to come back to. And it helps to have a dialogue with another person or other people, helps to know yourself, and to be hydrated and to be fit physically and various other things. That's not that hard. And you may not know what you're going to get out of it, but it's kind of like a crapshoot. So it's like you can take the same psychedelic 10 times and never have the same experience twice. Okay, so what determines it? Well, it's the context, it's what you're ready for, it's what you figured out last time, it's how much patience and endurance you have this time, so forth. But dreams, on the other hand, always confound you. They, I believe, exist to disintegrate your world. And they immediately present you with contradictions. And they don't have a point. They're not trying to tell you anything. They're trying to disintegrate your contrived reality. They're trying to basically show you the world does not make sense. Here, look at these things. Do they make sense? And you feel in a dream, a nighttime dream, that you're in a real situation as if it's reality, and it doesn't make sense. But if you work at it, do dream work, which involves remembering and thinking and emoting and meditating, they start to move more in your direction. And they start to treat you, dreams, I'm saying, as more of a co-conspirator and less as a stooge. And you start to have conversations that make more sense. You start to have a little more agency. And they create a little more brighter flowers than the kind of black and white confusion that we're often left with. So I'm very interested in dreams these days.
Okay, because I was going to just jump into now all the money involved in psychedelics and how they are really powerful medicine and being more subtly attuned these days. I wouldn't even consider this stuff and how I don't know if you're into metaphysics or stuff, how they're tied into the astral realm, it seems like, for so many people, and how many things can go wrong, how many people use them for dark sorcery and things like this that I've heard about. But we'll set that aside now. And so dreams, yeah, they're fascinating. So I wanted to see if you've noticed, if you've been into this for quite some time, and if you've noticed any big themes just in the dream world, let's say, from maybe, I don't know, 30, 40 years ago up to like 20 years ago, 10 years ago, in your own experience engaging with them. I mean, how do you do lucid dreaming? How lucid would you say you are? So we got the general themes with your dreamscape and those of others you talk about with this, and then the amount of degree, and then cross reference that with a degree of lucidity. Because I hear some claims that the dream world these days is like, it's not like a standard dream. It's so off the walls, different compared to what it used to be. Well, I don't know, years and years ago. I will throw in one other thing here that I don't disagree with what you say. I'm just saying there's other things here. I think we tend to ascribe too much importance sometimes to dreams and sometimes too little. We also have this phenomena, like if a window's open, in our room while we're dreaming, then that might affect the material in the dream. It has a correlation, or that you could just be wind in the belly, so to speak, some of the dreams. But then there's other ones that are based on, I guess, other things. So yeah, I think that's enough to chew on here that I sent you. We're on this.
You'd asked, how did science affect or lead me into psychology? And now you ask, what are the themes, or how have the themes of dreams changed over time? And the thing I left out is that the greatest influence in my interest in and involvement in therapy or psychology has been my two marriages, both of which failed in my regards, on my criteria, because I had a child with each of those two women, and both of them elected to, dissolve the marriage. And those are the subjects of my dreams. In addition to my parents, who continue to reappear in my dreams in sort of rehabilitated forms. So, you could say I was traumatized, but everybody was traumatized. I wasn't violated or physically injured in my childhood, but I was emotionally upset, and I identified that upset with my parents to some degree. And so those are the people that appear in my dreams, either usually reformed versions of them that I either appreciate now, or I worry about more, or I almost, you could say, play a parenting role to. That is, I parent them. So the parents, along with the two ex-wives, are the main characters in my dreams. And, that's changed over time. Each of, the first marriage lasted 10 years. The second marriage I thought lasted 3, but I was just being wishful about it. And I try to figure out what's common in those two situations, about those two different people, about my, attraction and decision making in those situations. And to some extent, it's like anything else. How much blood can you get from the stone? When have you may not have figured out all you wanted to figure out, but you may have figured out all that you're going to figure out given the information that you have. And learning more may require changing yourself, or, becoming more worldly or something, insightful. So those are the things I dream about. And the dreams confront me with what I don't know. They don't tell me what I don't know. They confront me with it. They confront me with, they place me in situations of conflict and ignorance and say, basically, good luck. Now wake up. And so I try to remember them. And it's often, like carrying a yoke, because I can't figure them out. But I figure that somehow carrying that weight will perhaps make an impression. If I'm open and thoughtful, maybe I'll be able to either figure it out or put it down.
So you're basically under the school that is unprocessed, kind of unconscious material.
Yes.
Yeah, trying to be made conscious, kind of the old school dream.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know.
Does
it need to be processed? Is it going to be rational? Is it emotional? So there are 3 things that I think are important for psychology: the rational, the emotional, and what you remember, your memory, your habits, cognitive and often neurological. So, you can be reactive to certain situations and they'll trigger you every time. That doesn't mean there's anything to be figured out emotionally or rationally. So you have to distinguish balance and resilience and agility from rationality and emotionality. They're all different. But the question is, how do you juggle them, if juggle's the right word, or integrate them? Or let them pass, let them go. I think the two wives are the greatest exercise in that, greater than physics. Because physics is just a bunch of, guys pissing at each other. And there's not a great deal to learn from the average professional, structure, I don't think.
It reminds me of the old joke that guy gets a genie or something. He gets a wish, and he says, what do you want? Anything? And he goes, well, I want to be able to go over and play golf in Hawaii anytime I want. So just build me an interstate over there, and then I'll just go over there anytime I want to play golf. And he's, no, it's too complicated. Something else. And he goes, Well, I really want to be able to understand women. And then the genie or God or whatever says, okay, do you want that highway 2 lanes or 4 lanes? So it's I mean, maybe this sounds a little misogynistic, but women are very complex, and it's a beautiful thing, actually, and I can't begin to think that I could understand my relationships. So like I don't know what kind of approach I have. It doesn't mean I don't stop doing it. It means that, okay, what is my part in this, and what are my limitations, where are my strengths and weaknesses, and what should I do about those? And then as a lot of things in the psychosocial world apply to so many spheres, but when it comes to intimate relationships, that type of it doesn't really fly in the same way, does it? It's way more complex, and I'll just leave it there. So it is a fascinating ground for all areas of life, relationships. I think that's enough for me to say about it right
So
now.
I take a very sociobiological approach as well. I would say women can be defined by motherhood, at least in that period of their lives when they are biologically inclined to motherhood. And that it's a lot harder to be a good mother than we recognize. And that contributes to the vagaries of a woman's psychology in the mothering years. And as a culture, we're not very good at raising kids. And if it weren't for mothers, our whole society would be fucked up, which isn't to say that most mothers do it very well anyhow, but at least, I mean, it's like, mother bears, to make a very simple example, are very protective of their cubs to the point that they're the most dangerous of bears. Yet after a year, they shoo their cubs away. They make their cubs leave. They will not tolerate their cubs staying with them. And that switch is so extreme and hard to understand from a human point of view, because humans, first of all, they're not, for the most part, successfully mothering, and then they're not successfully separating either. But the bears do it, and that's just, a simple example. I'm sure you could find millions of other examples.
It's a great one, and it reminds me, I'm sorry to stray into more Buddhist stuff here, that the Metta Sutta, it's often translated as loving kindness. There's a line in there, even as a single mother protects her child, her only child, that is how we should regard all living beings, and to me, that's a powerful image and such an aspiration to aspire to. Could you imagine if single mothers with one child, and how they are around that, and how we could do that, if we could have that same type of heart space for all living beings? It's incredibly inspiring to me, because I'm not quite there yet, obviously.
Well, let me add a
Yeah.
contradiction to that, which is
Sure.
that most parents, and I would say mothers probably predominantly, never learn and never do give enough autonomy to their kids so that their kids can make their own learning mistakes and do their own problem creation and solving. So it's, the helicopter mother. And,
Yep.
it gets back to the whole nuclear family. And do you have role models outside? Do you have grandparents? No. Do you have aunts and uncles? No. Does everybody live in a community? No. Here's the quick thing. So first there was Freud and all those strange sexual theories of his. And then there was Jung and this sort of red book and the psychology of spirituality. And then his student was Wilhelm Reich, who just really went right off the edge. And, with orgone energy.
Yes.
And then one of Wilhelm Reich's students was A.S. Neal, who started the school Summerhill in England, which was the first democratic school where no teachers, no classes, no subjects, just developmental, entirely focused on building community and responsibility. And, they'd teach if you wanted to learn, but mostly it was about how to get along and build a community. And this is what I sent my first kid to. And it's very interesting because, there are many ways to do it, but the way this school did it, which is called the Sudbury School, of which there are a few in the world, because Sudbury, Massachusetts was where it originated, and it did come from the A.S. Neal model of Summerhill, though they don't give him credit. And the way they run it is that the adults don't offer any teaching. The adults who run the school don't teach, or they don't They don't enforce laws, rules. They don't give grades. They don't give judgments. They sit in the background.
So
And
it's
they,
basically like homeschooling without the home, or some types
right.
of
And they
homeschooling
don't want the
without the home.
parents around either, because the parents will then do this sort of helicopter mom, my kid, your kid, I'll represent you. So no, each kid's got to represent themselves. Every week there's a school meeting and all the kids from kindergarten to high school get together and they go over all the complaints. And they all have to figure out, the adults don't do it. Kids have to figure out what to do with the complaints. Who's guilty of what and what's going to be done about it. They make the rules. They have this big book of rules, hundreds of pages of rules. And it's got to be organized because, of course, at first, every rule is a one-off response to a one-off problem. And it's got to be consolidated and it's got to be enforced. And everyone's got to be a policeman and everybody's got to be a judge. And in fact, there are a few kids every week who are put in the role of judge. And there's no age discrimination. You can be a kindergartner or a senior, and you're in the same group of judges. And you can imagine the kind of dialogues that would happen. He spit at me, or, he shit in his pants. And, what are we going to do about it? Or he, stole my book or my toy. And it's a much more difficult problem than adults could deal with. But the kids not only could, but would very successfully deal with it.
It doesn't turn into like Lord of the Flies or anything, right?
Well, you have to remember that William Golding, who wrote Lord of the Flies, hated kids. And his story is about adults and their misbehavior, not kids. He just hated kids.
Yeah.
So it's completely successful.
And is there hierarchies there, or what do they do all day? Whatever they want, but yeah.
If you wanted an adult to help you get resources, they would help you, but only at your asking. So yeah, some people would learn sewing or reading, or they didn't teach anything. But the point is, if you didn't learn how to speak and read, you couldn't be effective in the community. And if you didn't learn basic math, you couldn't value things relative to each other. So the biggest objection to compulsory schooling is that it's not relevant. Who cares about, the 1812 Accord of Ontario or whatnot, right? It's irrelevant.
Well, if you're interested in it, maybe that's right. To be required to be a good human being and successful in life, to know something as trivial as that, right? It's not high up there on.
There's a lot of things you need in a context where you're responsible that you don't need to worry about historical things that are out of your scope. So, who needs to study Piaget's theory of childhood when you've got 50 kids right around you teaching you? Anyway, so where was I going with that? Something about schooling, education, learning, and dealing with conflict. And motherhood, that's where it came from, motherhood. So, like you're saying, it was like a family without parents, where, the role of the adults was to keep the school from burning down, which is a serious thing when you've got kids who can do anything they want. They can play with matches, they can light fires, they can build tree houses, catapults, whatever, So there had to be somebody to set some boundaries. You get lost in the woods, hurt yourself. But those are the things that, it gets me back to my mountaineering background. Those are the things which have real consequences to you. They are things you do, and you can't blame anyone else for, and you have to resolve them. Even if they're other people's problems, if they're in your orbit, you can't ignore them. So that in terms of motherhood, we were talking about genders and fathers and mothers. So,
this notion of loving kindness as a mother, and I don't know if I probably said it wrong, but it protects her child, her only child. I don't know if it's clear whether she has a husband or not, but I think that's irrelevant to this point that I was making there about, they only have one child. And so that's going to be more protective than I guess a mother with multiple children or something like this. But no, I appreciate, and I don't know where I'm going with that or where it came from. To tie back, I don't have any really further point with that, just a clarification. But yeah, that's fascinating. I haven't heard. I thought I've just briefly heard the name of this school, these schools, but I wasn't that familiar with the structure or lack thereof, so to speak. So how did you? I was just curious how you found out about that. How you
I
learned about this?
learned about Summerhill, the original English version of the 1940s, when I was in kindergarten for some reason. I don't know.
Huh.
I was dissatisfied with school from the very start, and I imagined what would that be like to go to such a school. I never had the opportunity to, and I never did. But when I was an adult and had a kid of my own, this school popped up in our neighborhood because it was a liberal-minded neighborhood with some people with enough money to fund it, because it's not a school that can fund itself given the resources it needs and the few people that are, you know.
Well, right on. Okay. Well, I think I want to throw you another, let's say 90-degree turn, go at another 90-degree turn here, if you're up for it before we start wrapping
Sure.
up. Hypnosis. You mentioned hypnosis, and I've talked to another guy that's in hypnosis, and this is way out in left field here, but I wanted to know if you knew anything about the potential abuses around it. Now, I don't want to just completely write it off and say it doesn't have any therapeutic value or people shouldn't be doing hypnosis, nor do I have any personal experience with it, so I have nowhere to talk. I have no place to talk to from this, because usually if I want to say anything with any kind of semblance of authority, I want to at least know and see and know it directly, and I haven't done it. Honestly, I just don't know if I trust anyone enough to put me under hypnosis, and I don't know if that's probably not a fair assessment either. But I want to know if some of these claims I've heard about, I don't know if you're familiar with MKUltra, this one project that was done by the CIA and that was exposed by the church committee. A part of it, a lot of it got destroyed. There were so many sub-projects, and some of that projects, or some of the sub-projects, from what I understand, did employ some forms of hypnosis, things like psychic driving and things like this. So I just wanted to see what you would say about its potential for abuse. I mean, some people will claim, no, you can't do any kind of post-hypnotic suggestion for someone that normally wouldn't do anything like that. So I just wanted to get your feedback on, what is the extent of what is possible as far as the other end, the non-therapeutic end of this, what we'll say, of some of the things that I've heard that are claimed, towards like the Manchurian Candidate style things, or, oh my gosh, all kinds of stuff, deliberately doing trauma-based mind control, or RAMCOA, ritual abuse, mind control, organized abuse, these type of things. And it's I shouldn't say potential, it's, but like, what's the extent of things to look out for, I would say, with this?
So the fundamental point to remember in hypnosis is that everything is hypnosis. So we're all in consensual reality that we've built. So you and I are dialoguing in an intellectual reality. We're operating on a similar background of memories and social experience. We are engaging in a hypnotic state of focus, and if I were to freak out and start screaming, it would be disruptive to the conversation. So, but all of these are all states this is a consensual hypnotic state that you and I are in. And if somebody's listening to it, they're in a slightly different, because they're not engaged, they're receptive, but they're in another hypnotic state. Maybe they're driving, listening to this podcast, and they're zoned out or something.
These
are all
case,
hypnotic
please
states.
Focus on the road and turn off our conversation and focus on the road.
Well, that's right. So all of these are, the Manchurian Candidate. Are you putting triggers in people's minds to act involuntarily or voluntarily? So, what is it about being Irish that will incline you to riot when certain topics come up? Has this been programmed into you intentionally, or is this just part of your hypnotic culture? So that's the sort of the baseline is that it's all hypnosis of different degrees. Some of it's unconscious, some of it's, somnambulistic, some of it's psychotic. Okay. And then the next level, sort of adjacent to that, is that there are two kinds of hypnosis. There's the suggestive kind, which tells you what to think, and then there's the exploratory kind, which pulls out of you what you think. And the general, like your question sort of angled toward the suggestive kind. What can people be made to do? And the answer to that is suggestive hypnosis builds on people's previous inclinations. It attempts to strengthen what they feel, but it can't override underlying feeling. It doesn't have the power in most cases. So you do, in some cases, have the ability to make people remember and forget things that never happened. So there's this sort of false memory stuff about people being told they had been sexually abused, and then they would think they did.
Well, look into the funding and who all was involved in the False Memory Foundation too. It's an interesting rabbit hole. I don't want to go into that because I don't have all the details in front of me with that one too. But I mean, I will say, yeah, you make some really good points about this. So then I'm thinking that from what I hear of some of these abusive type situations are also used in conjunction with other techniques. I mean, you do conditioning or whatever to get someone. So then you get someone that's familiar with something already or conditioned towards something. Then you can use it in conjunction with whatever
So the
to
typical
strengthen
thing
that
is
as well.
like
Yeah.
habits.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Smoking. You can't hypnotize somebody to stop smoking unless they have some inclination to stop smoking. You can't put in a desire they don't have. You can amplify, encourage, and you can say, well, smoking is like, pouring sludge into your mind, and you could implant an image of polluting yourself, which will be effective for somebody who's afraid they might be doing that and may then come up into their imagination when they associate with smoking, and maybe they'll be less inclined to smoke, and in that method or through that method overcome their habit.
But by that kind of rationale, I don't know if that's the right word to put it. Can you, if you get deep enough, and that's supposedly a trigger word, right? Deep.
Yes.
But right. So basically, if you go to kind of people's core roots and desires, you've got basically the unwholesome roots are like greed, and then you've got hatred, and then you've got ignorance or delusion. I don't know if it works really with ignorance or delusion, but can you start stacking, you start tapping into something that's really common in everyone. And then if you get to know someone, then you can start stacking onto, okay, you make this leap. That's not too much of a leap. Then that connection's made. I don't know if you follow where I'm going with this. I don't know if I am either. But then once that connection is made, then that's already there. Then you kind of suggest or associate it with another step. And then another step. So what normally wouldn't at first surface glance have any kind of foundation there to draw on, that's been built up by this association or step-by-step method. I don't know if that makes any sense.
Okay, but you have to understand that in hypnosis or hypnotherapy, you're going to visit somebody, you're paying them for a certain amount of time, and there's usually a focal topic that you're dealing with. Whereas the kind of thing that you're talking about sounds like institutional investment, relationship commitment. I mean, it's like your marriage in which these things get layered, not your hypnotherapist. So those are the things where, you really do get buy-in. You become, a racist or a, member of an organization in which certain thoughts are continually reinforced, or just, a corporate member, whatever. And so those, as I said before, it's all hypnosis. Those are areas in which you repeatedly are encouraged and triggered and reminded to think in certain conformist or manipulated ways. And, that's the real Manchurian candidate. That's when you take somebody, you give them in boot camp, and you say, when you see the enemy, shoot him. And, and then you get people who do that. And that's a form of hypnosis, I would say.
Well, that's right. I am talking about those contexts, not your individual hypnotherapist for a
Right.
specific issue. Yeah, it doesn't really apply that way. I wouldn't think, unless someone has supposedly these with a handler and a programmer, and
It takes time, remember though, and
yeah, exactly. Well,
it also
lifetime,
takes
sometime people.
allowance. You have to allow somebody that power. Now you may be misled, your
Yeah,
guru you think maybe
sure.
in fact
Consent. It's
is
all
not such a
about
guru.
harvesting consent, right? That's the
Right.
thing. Or some of it's I hear claims that it's generational, or that they start doing this in the womb even that soon. It's really not the most pleasant thing to learn about some of these claims that I've looked into around Ramcoa, So yeah, it's not fun. The reason I think it's something to bring up is because if such extremes exist, then how much of this will impact those around them and maybe society on a whole? So, and I have no way to
I
answer
think
that.
it's
That's why I think it's
important.
important. Yeah.
I think it's important that people recognize this stuff exists and that it's not fancy. It's like this is like normal human behavior. It's called conformist thinking, groupthink, manipulative thinking, emotional manipulation, and various
Well, gaslighting.
manipulations,
Yeah. Yeah.
gaslighting,
Yeah.
dominance.
Hmm.
Like it.
Well, trauma bonding, when
Yes,
when trauma is induced deliberately in order to program different identities and things
yes.
too for different
Well,
jobs and purposes, and then covered up or switched back, yeah. So,
for example, in high school, there were a few luminaries. I would say high school was a trauma bonding situation. You're put
yeah,
under pressure and you make certain alliances.
yeah.
And I remember in high school the real luminaries, well, I only know two. They were very successful socially and academically successful, and they both committed suicide. So
Wow.
these were, you know, I think you could say that they were misled and that their powers were not sufficiently self-endorsing.
And what does that say about the standard schooling system? It speaks volumes to it, I think. I mean, I don't think it's entirely representative, but I can say that it seems like a template though that is there. And unfortunately,
Well, you can't, I have to be even more of a conspiracy theorist than you. It doesn't stop at school. It's the institution
yeah, of
that
course.
instilled school, that created school. It's the community that supports it. It's the taxpayers who fund it. It's the corporations who rely on it. It's
Then it
endless.
gets into where I feel that most of it is just driven by a few bad apples, like sociopaths and psychopaths at the top. And then everybody else is kind of just, if they know that and then they're complicit, then that's one thing. But a lot of people, it just seems just go along to get along.
Yeah.
They have bills to pay, they have the kids to feed, and then, so they just kind of go along, or they don't really know, or they just look the other way because they have
So
other
how
things to
does
do.
the single mother raise their child to know enough to effectively avoid these problems when the singular mother is so involved in protecting or facilitating? So my answer is you have to let the kid go out and see for themselves. And that's dangerous. Yes, it's dangerous. But providing support is not the same as providing protection. I think that's
They have to be let go
important.
of eventually anyway, but there's already a place for, single mothers to get support from the government, and then they're in the thrall of the government instead of the people they know, families, and different support systems. So that's there too. Some people in that world will say that's done by design to get people dependent. But anyway, I won't go down that route, but you're right, and so maybe what kind of advice do you have for parents to, and I'm of course not one, but like to loosen that grip, to bring the helicopter down and away, for a while, or don't get on the helicopter to begin with, or like when is a good time to start doing that? Because I thought some systems say basically like you have to, like to 5 years old, you have to be the child needs like constant attention, that because of that strong bond that there should be like almost over involvement. Then there's less, and then eventually when they get into adolescent years, then you're just kind of like a mentor or something, and so how to not get overly befriend your children, or not, you're not necessarily their best friend, but you're parenting in a way. So like what kind of, but eventually you have to let go. But how do you, just in a nutshell, an overview, like how do you see child rearing and what should be done about it, I guess?
It
It's a
would
big
depend on
question.
your family. If you have an extended family, I just read that research shows that middle kids are much more successful than the early first and last kids because they're the most ignored. And it means they barter and negotiate relationships with their siblings, and they don't have the overlording influence of their parents to control or resolve their issues. So, on the one hand, I would say, it's better to have a larger community so that there's, because kids don't have a very large world. They don't drive, they don't travel, they don't make their own decisions, and they don't even know how to wash the dishes. So the larger the environment, the better for a kid. More conflict, more opportunity, more novelty, more difference, racial, religious, community, geographical, traveling. So, all those things. I wrote a book. My first book is called The Learning Project, and it's about how you learn. And I interviewed lots of kids and adults and elders, and they all had different stories. But, most of it was about learning and exploring and experimenting. And they would learn, the kids anyway, in places you wouldn't think, by just being outside and sleeping under trees and, having rough and tumble experiences. So at the same time that a kid needs to experience as much as possible and get the feedback that's authentic, not sort of turned into sort of baby food. At the same time, I would say to adults, you have to be as present and involved as possible so that you're relevant and not stupid and out of generation, which, I mean, you can't really be in the generation. So I live with a 15-year-old, and I keep my ears open and my doors open, and he's just becoming sexual, and it's literally painful for me to listen to, and I just keep my mouth shut. I mean, I don't I don't engage I don't engage in that kind of talk. I don't have that kind of ignorance. I don't want to relive that period of my life. So my role in his life is to be the designated asshole. You know, I will say some things and I'll do certain things and I will enforce certain things in order to keep the house livable. And he's more and more closing his door now and talking to people privately. And that's got to be okay too. But I do try to be as intrusive as possible, not to violate his boundaries, but to let him know that I'm curious and interested. So I think that's it. It's all about like learning. You don't tell people to learn, you offer them the opportunity of sharing what you know. And maybe they don't want it. And maybe, so for example, for a teenager kid, it's not that he doesn't want to know what I know. It's that he wants to show that he doesn't want to know. In other words, he wants to assert his independence even though he has nothing to go on. So, okay. And it's much better than what I was doing, which was going off to climb mountains and getting myself killed. I might not have done that if I had parents who gave me enough blowback without having to go up into some dangerous place. And I think that's safer and more responsible than being disengaged. So
Well, right.
you're not looking for acceptance. You're just offering.
Very wise. Appreciate it. Well, we've went to some safe places here, and I think we've went to some more dangerous places in our conversation. I appreciate it all, and thanks for joining today. So why don't you tell people how they can get in touch with you, what kind of offerings you have, and anything else you want to draw people's attention to, then take this podcast out, this episode out on a final message.
My website is mindstrengthbalance.com. Mindstrengthbalance.com. And there I have pages on sleep and therapy and brain training. I have hypnotic recorded, audio files on dozens of different subjects. We haven't even talked about the scope of that. And I was just getting around to talk about the alternative kind of hypnosis to suggestive, which was exploratory. So I do the exploratory kind. I don't do the suggestive. So then there's books. I've got a dozen books and on topics of education and hypnosis and even one on architecture. But I also have a blog. And if you subscribe to the blog, of which you can do for free, then you get a download link to the latest book called Dreaming Yourself into Being, which is about how you resolve your reality by confronting your dreams. I do actually think your dreams are an invitation to create your reality, and that you might even say your reality is created in your dreams. So it's a dream work book, or book on dream work. And you get the free link to that if you subscribe to the blog, which I hope you'll do. And then you can always contact me because I am a therapist and a coach, but it's much easier to just read the books and the blog and look at the website at Mind Strength Balance.
Well, cool. You want to leave anyone, or you want to leave the listeners and watchers on a final note? What do you want to go out on today?
Well, I think it's important from sort of the Buddhist perspective to realize we're all stupid, and you can take that many different ways, but I think the most positive way to take that is that you really have to try to improve yourself, because you may not be you're kind of born a blank slate. You have this genetic information, and then most of it's culturally learned, and it's not been organized well, and it's not been organized for your best interests. So you're kind of like a compost heap of educational ideas and political trends and personal initiatives. And you really have to go through that and consider yourself as a garden that needs to be tended. You've got to separate the toxic stuff and throw out the pieces of glass and till the soil and plant some seeds and make an effort to water your future. I have a much greater respect for therapy and counseling than I did when I was a physicist, where I thought it was just a question of learning and skill. It's a lot deeper. It takes a lot more courage than just taking courses. So that's what people should do, work on themselves.
Very good. Agree on that. And with that, may all beings everywhere come to cultivate great wisdom to overcome their challenges for their own well-being, for the well-being of all beings everywhere. And so may all beings everywhere realize awakening and be free. Bye now.